When Warner Brothers executives greenlit Batman Beyond, they imagined that the show would focus on a teenaged Batman and his struggles to juggle homework and relationships with costumed heroics. What they actually got was a show about radioactive billionaires, morally questionable tech moguls, and a teenage vigilante navigating a future Gotham where capitalism was practically a supervillain in a suit. While they were supportive, it was suggested for the second season that they might want to rein things in and tell more child-friendly stories that viewers could relate to. But that doesn't mean that they were done subverting expectations and telling mature, morally complex stories about corruption and human nature. Case in point, the episode April Moon. One of the few episodes where neither of the Batmen have a personal stake in the story. Instead, it's focused on a lonely doctor who falls for the wrong woman and has to compromise himself to ensure her safety. This episode really stands out because of how it resists the network's teen drama mandate, delivering a story that is emotionally complex, morally ambiguous, and stylistically pulp noir. But originally the episode started out quite differently. James Tucker originally conceived a villain talent agency hiring out teen villains as a campy commentary on how talent agencies represented actors in Hollywood. When the idea was presented to writer Stan Berkowitz, he was less keen on it, and so Alan Burnett suggested that it might be about a doctor working with villains, and those words sparked an idea with Stan. The ending for this episode, with the doctor menacingly performing surgery on one of the villains who wronged him. For those not familiar with Stan's work, he wrote many of the most interesting and morally complex episodes of Superman the Animated Series, like Brave New Metropolis, as well as Justice League's A Better World with the Justice Lords. Stan's scripts typically combine emotionally mature storytelling with a morally complex plot, and love is a theme he often returns to. This episode is about a Dr. Corso, a prosthetics specialist whose much younger wife April gets kidnapped by a street gang who then force him to fit them with cybernetic enhancements to turn them into supervillains. The twist is that his wife April was having an affair with the leader of the gang, and as such she was never really in any danger. The gang consists of Bullwhip, who has cybernetic whips added to his wrists, Knee-Jerk, who has blades coming out of his knees and forearms, Terrapin, who has an impenetrable body armor, and Nux, who has massive metal hands. With their powers, they go on a crime spree robbing jewelry stores, and this is where Batman comes in. While he does put up a good fight and damages Knee-Jerk's limbs, the gang manage to overpower him. When Batman looks over the crime scene, he notices a servomotor, a specifically designed motor, and notes that he has similar machinery in his suit. So right there is the first thematic connection around the ethical use of technology and the quality of a person's character. Terry's physical strength comes from his costume and the machinery behind it, but it is a costume that he can remove. His real strength is his morality. The gang, meanwhile, transform themselves with similar technology, sacrificing their original identities in the pursuit of power and respect. But the irony is that they are weak, immoral people. The servomotor also helps move the plot along, as the elder Batman notes that he recognizes the handiwork of Dr. Corso. That's who he had bought the costume servomotors from back in the day, and so he sends Batman out to investigate. Corso is initially evasive, lulling Batman into a false sense of security before sedating him and fleeing, but eventually Batman lures him into a trap by pretending to be a seriously wounded patient in need of help. Corso drops everything he was doing to help a stranger, which indicates that he isn't too far gone, and it's here that the core plot of the episode is explained. Dr. Corso had always dreamed of being a doctor and was so focused on his work that he had fallen behind in other regards. He had no friends to speak of and really only lived for his work. Then one day a new nurse joined his team, a woman named April, and he was immediately smitten. He was so besotted with her that within a few weeks of knowing her, he proposed, and she gleefully accepted. Everything was going well for the couple until he was approached by a young man with a wounded wrist who expressed an interest in becoming cybernetically enhanced. He offered Corso as much money as he wanted, but Corso refused, saying he already had all he could ever want. When he returned home that night, he found his house ransacked and April gone. She had been kidnapped, and if he ever wanted to see her again, he'd have to augment that young man and his friends to help them become superpowered criminals. What he didn't know is that April was in a relationship with Bullwhip, but what isn't clear, and very deliberately I should add, is just how involved in the scheme she was. Ever since I first saw this episode, I had assumed that she was a plant, someone that had been put there to seduce Corso and exploit him, but there's no suggestion of that in the episode. It's just as likely that April started the relationship with Bullwhip after she was kidnapped. Maybe she even had Stockholm Syndrome, and that was the point. Similarly, when the episode ends after Batman correctly guesses the code word to deactivate their enhancements, April Moon, Bullwhip goes to Corso to get more enhancements. What he doesn't know is that Corso saw him canoodling with April, so he knows that she isn't really in any danger anymore. In one of the series' most chilling endings, Corso puts Bullwhip under anesthesia and says that he promises not to hold back. If he had intended to humiliate Bullwhip, he could have said April Moon to disarm him. From there, he could have reported him to the authorities, but no. He goes ahead with the surgery. He clearly had something else in mind, but we're never told what. Now, clearly there's two reasons for this. One could be censorship. You're not going to be able to show a man chopping up an unconscious person's body in a kid's cartoon. And the other being that they didn't want to prevent the characters from returning in the future. But the ambiguity of it all is delightful. The audience is left to interpret the events and no one is wrong. Although Stan has told me what he thinks happened. Corso intended to use his surgical skills to get revenge, not kill him. Bullwhip had emasculated him by having his way with his wife, so he would retaliate. Quite what that means, well, I'll leave it to your imagination. It's such a dark ending that stays with you long afterwards, and it really embodies the tonal freedom of Batman Beyond. One week you could have a domestic comedy of the Egg Baby episode, the next the classic horror of the Earth Mover, and after that the pulpy noir April Moon. This episode has all the hallmarks of a 1930s pulp story. It's just set in the future. It's about love, lust, and betrayal. But unlike the pulps of the past, the episode wisely chooses to leave April unpunished. There's that ambiguity again. Stan told me that he believed that after Bullwhip failed to return, April would have gone off to find the next sap to live off of. But I personally am drawn to the idea that she would return to Corso and pretend like she had escaped. I can easily imagine Corso welcoming her back, willing to overlook her transgression, maybe even pretending that he didn't know because he loves her and doesn't want to lose what he has, which may be a more horrible fate for the good doctor. I feel like this is a recurring thing in Stan's superhero work. Brilliant men thinking they know it all and being blindsided by reality. Just look at the new Batman Adventures episode Chemistry, where Batman gets married. Granted, he had been dosed with pheromones that made him more susceptible to romantic suggestion, but he was willing to give up being Batman to marry a person that he had recently met. Similarly, in the Batman episode Riddler's Revenge, we see that the genius Edward Nygma had spent years thinking that a wealthy industrialist had sabotaged his experiment, when in reality it was his partner, Julie. All three men didn't really know the women they felt they loved. They projected an idea of who they thought the women were, but it was a fantasy. April is a gold digger, Susan was a plant woman, and Julie was an ambitious woman who valued wealth over love. But while Susan and Julie get their comeuppance, April is never seen again. This commentary from Stan is that for as brilliant as these men are, they are not well-rounded. For every area in which they excel, there are areas where they're woefully lagging behind. It's almost as if they're stuck in an adolescent phase, blind to their own inexperience. And boy, did that realization make me feel seen. Quick to form connections with people because of who I imagine them to be, not necessarily because of who they are, which goes some way towards explaining why I hold this episode in high regard, I'm sure. It trusts the audience's intelligence, telling a story with a lingering emotional and moral resonance. Yes, there are better episodes. Does it get much better than Meltdown? I don't think so. But April Moon still exemplifies Batman Beyond's mastery of morally complex storytelling. And how did I get this far without mentioning the episode's jazz score from Michael McQuistion? There's nothing else like this in the show, and it evokes the noir movies of the 30s and 40s. I had to double check that the composers didn't assign this episode to someone else at first because it was so different. At the end of the day, April Moon is one of those episodes that lingers long after the credits roll because of its moral texture. It reminds us that power and skill aren't inherently heroic because the same servomotors that Terry wields responsibly are used by the gang to exploit and dominate. And even when a character like Dr. Corso has every reason to be a villain, the choices he makes are filtered through love, grief, and obsession. That ethical ambiguity is what makes the episode stand apart. Stylistically, the episode is a love letter to pulp noir, from the moonlit betrayals to the jazz-infused score. It evokes an earlier era of storytelling while firmly planting itself in a futuristic Gotham. The tension, the shadows, the moral compromises, all of it recalls the thrillers of a bygone era, updated with the technology and ethics of tomorrow. And yet, like some of the best pulp stories, it refuses to hand the audience easy answers. April's motivations, Bullwhip's fate, and Corso's future are left tantalizingly unclear, inviting us to fill in the gaps with our own imagination. And that's what makes April Moon and Batman Beyond in general so remarkable. Yes, the story is about futuristic suits, cybernetic limbs, and high-tech crime, but it's just as much about human ambition, desire, and the ethical choices we make when given power. From radioactive billionaires scheming in concrete towers to morally questionable tech moguls, and of course a teenage vigilante navigating it all, the series reminds us that Neo-Gotham's true dangers are as much about human flaws as supervillains. So the next time someone calls Batman Beyond just a teen Batman cartoon, remember this episode. The network expected homework and high school drama, but what they got was a show that could be chilling, funny, heart-wrenching, and morally intricate. One that trusted its audience, defied expectations, and explored the complexities of the human condition. That's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time, when I return on Friday, we're going to talk about a radically reimagined villain that appeared in Justice League one time. In the comics, he was the personification of God's wrath, but in the cartoon he was very different. We're going to talk about Eclipso. And next Monday, it's time to go back to my recent Batman the Brave and the Bold poll to talk about the character that came in second place, Jaime Reyes, the Blue Beetle. Hope to see you then.